everybody. Welcome back. Day 2 ATSV 2021. And we're bringing you another ATS veteran, as we were just discussing. Avedis Seferian. He is the CEO, president, head honcho, sorry, the big cheese, the main guy over at RAP. He has been with us since 2016. We were just talking about August 2016. It's amazing it's been that long, Avedis. RAP is one of the foremost authorities in compliance, they really are the voice as far as getting certified for factories and supply chain. So very happy to have him back here today. So we'll go ahead and just get into it. I'm very excited to see what the updates are, Avedis. I'd like to remind everybody that we do have a Q&A at the very end. So if you have any questions along the way, please include them in the chat function. For those of you watching on Facebook Live, go ahead and feed your questions there, and then administrator will feed them on to me at the very end. So, Avedis, floor is yours. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Jason, for that all too kind introduction. It really is wonderful to have been a part of this from the very beginning. 5 years now, and quite a lot has happened in those 5 years, especially the last one of those 5 years, obviously. So I'm very happy to be here with you all and talk to you a little bit about social responsibility and where we are. We're going to be talking about the expanding due diligence requirements for responsible supply chains this session. And let me get the screen on here for you guys, so you should be able to see the front page of my PowerPoint right now. As I was saying to Jason earlier, we have seen an incredible year this past year, and so much has changed and so much has evolved, and obviously this aspect of doing stuff on Zoom is one of the legacies of what we went through with the pandemic. But it's not just the pandemic that has been the source of change. A lot of stuff had been happening even before the pandemic, and this past year has in some ways accelerated some of those trends. But what I'm going to be talking about for this session has not much to do with the pandemic, except to the extent of some acceleration, as I said, but really about the future, about what responsible sourcing is going to look like, and it started already to look like. And in particular, what the now expanding due diligence requirements are in that arena. So what I'm going to have for you guys over the next 30, 40 minutes or so is just a presentation that's going to talk about what we have come to, what the modern sort of realities are with regards to supply chains. What is the sort of current state of what supply chains look like, what the modern marketplace and what the modern consumer now sort of represents in themselves. And in particular, with regards to the sort of the due diligence requirements that I'm going to be focusing on, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the modern investor and the modern regulator, what governments are focusing their attention on these days. All of which is sort of the backdrop to talk about supply chain due diligence and what that has now come to look like and what it's going to require more of going forward. And that is the point in the presentation that I'll have a chance to talk to you a little bit about RAP, tell you about my organization. This presentation is not meant to be primarily about that, but of course, I am the president, the CEO, the head honcho, and all those nice things Jason said. And what kind of big cheese would I be if I waste the opportunity to talk about my organization in front of a captive audience? So I'll tell you a little bit about RAP, and then talk a little bit about what some best practices might be with regards to enhanced due diligence requirements in modern day supply chain management practices. I'll have a few remarks to conclude with, and then hopefully save plenty of time for Q&A. And you've heard from Jason how to go about directing those questions. It's always my favorite part of the presentation, and I'm looking forward to hopefully a good conversation with all of y'all. All right, so let's talk a little bit about something that I suspect most of the folks in the audience are already quite well acquainted with, right? What modern supply chains look like. Today, they are fragmented, they are complex, and they are worldwide. That is what the sort of typical apparel, footwear, textiles, the kind of stuff that ATS specializes in. Your supply chains are likely going to be like this. They are no longer old school, brand or retailer running an owned and operated facility in their own geography. That stuff is in the past now. Most folks operate a worldwide, complicated, fragmented supply chain. It has serious consequences that come with it. I mean, obviously the model has economic benefits. That's why it evolved the way it did. But that fragmentation, that distribution across the planet does raise questions of visibility and does raise issues of traceability when it comes to a final sort of importer of record or brand or retailer in the US or anywhere else for that matter, having a really good idea where everything that went into the product that they are taking at the port and they're putting on the shelf for the customers came from. So there is that reality with the complex, fragmented, and worldwide supply chains that we all operate in. And that reality is made further complicated by another reality of the space and time that we occupy, and that's the fact that modern technology now makes for global instant communication. One of the things that the pandemic did accelerate, right, is sort of the ubiquity of Zoom now, the platform we're on right now, and other such video chat and webinar and conferencing technologies. And in general, the ability to get word from point A to point B all the way across the planet quite instantaneously. That's the reality we live in, and that's the backdrop against which these modern day supply chains are operating. And so any event, no matter where it takes place, anywhere in the world, is going to be on BBC or CNN, but perhaps even more importantly, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on other social media platforms within a matter of minutes or hours at most. And if it's bad news, it'll be on the minutes side of that scale, unfortunately. So that's some of the backdrop and the reality of modern day supply chains. And as a result, you're now, if you are a supply chain manager or a player in the supply chain, you're operating in an environment where you've got this constant media prospect of attention on you. And so your reputation as a brand or retailer, or as a manufacturer for that matter, is constantly on display, and supply chain management becomes a 24/7 global issue. It's not simply something that you can manage, within your work hours in the US and hope that nothing happens while you're asleep, because the world doesn't sleep, the news doesn't sleep. You got this 24/7 management challenge that you're dealing with, because when your customers are awake and online, your suppliers might be asleep, but when your suppliers are awake and online, your customers might be asleep. So everyone's always in some way or another on in the way modern supply chains are spread out. So what this means is you need constant proactive management of supply chain issues. It's not something, as I said, you can limit to just the work hours or limit to a set it and forget it policy that you put in place and then you sort of hope it just trickles down and takes care of itself. No. Constant proactive management is the call of the hour and the reality of modern day supply chains. All right, so that's sort of the supply chain overview. Let's talk a little bit about some of the elements of this modern space that we're occupying and why they come together to create such a need for enhanced due diligence. Let's start with the modern marketplace, right? This is one thing that for sure the pandemic has accelerated, but a trend that was already happening before, right? You no longer have brick and mortar being as dominant and in the past the sole way, with some catalog avenues accepted, of getting products out there. The modern marketplace today is this omni-channel reality that we're in, right? And if you're not in that space, then you're one of those countless unfortunate folks who are probably lining up for a bankruptcy filing, because that's the only way folks that have been able to do justice to themselves over the pandemic have succeeded in doing so, by having a strong online presence and having the ability to sell not just in physical stores, which folks couldn't go to for a while this time last year, but also through a website, through social media, through other omni-channel distributions. The modern marketplace today is very much an amalgamation of the traditional way, which still might be the single most popular way, but increasingly you're seeing that online presence. And again, online presence itself is evolving, right? It's no longer just a website or just the ability to buy through Amazon or something like that. You're looking for other ways, direct purchases through social media, other mechanisms that are simply a click away for your customer. And then you got to service all that from the back end with the logistics and support that goes to making sure the product gets to them and is carried that last mile. So there's a lot that goes into succeeding these days in a far more complicated and far more tech-driven, online leaning modern marketplace, right? And of course, that's enhanced by, complicated by, made further challenging by the fact that modern consumers are also very, very different from what the consumer looked like just 20, 25 years ago, right? This is where so much of that modern day consumption is now taking place. So even if you had moved into online fairly recently, and we're looking at sort of the traditional online, sort of the old original Amazon model where people were buying stuff through their computers, that's already outdated now. This is where folks are buying stuff. And as you can imagine, this is a consumer that skews younger, certainly skews tech savvy, and you've got a final element here that you were never challenged by before, and that is that these devices are not simply sources of making a consumption decision, but also information devices. So in the past, you're in a store and you're deciding whether or not you want to buy something, your ability to determine more information about that something was quite severely limited. You could maybe enhance it with some sort of point of sale displays, but those were controlled by, of course, the seller. Today, no, you've got all ways and means of getting information about the product before you purchase it, because you've got these supercomputers in your hand. The same source that's making you make the decision is going to be feeding you information about the thing that you're trying to make a decision on. So there's definitely a real challenge there in terms of what modern supply chains and modern consumer engagement is all about. Because today, the modern battlefield for branding, where you fight the fight for the hearts and minds and obviously the wallets of those consumers, is itself evolving. Right? Used to be back 20, 25 years ago, again, when brick and mortar was the main channel, that the messaging, the branding messaging was controlled by the brand. The brand decided, what the product would look like, what it would be called, what channels it would be distributed through. If you're running ads for it, what TV shows you run those ads before or during or after, what point of purchase displays you have, all of that stuff controlled by the brand. Today, the battlefield for branding, where that decision is being made, is here, is online, is through social media, right? And the single biggest difference that implies, that brings to the table, is the message is no longer directly in your control. You, the brand, you, the seller, aren't the ones able to monopolize the story of the product. Now it's the consumer, with their likes, with their tweets, with their TikTok videos about it, that tells the story of the product, tells the story of the brand. They're the ones carrying your message for you, and they're not entirely in your control. So this is the battlefield, modern day consumer engagement. This is where the battle for the hearts and minds, and as I said already, ultimately the wallets of the consumers is taking place online, on social media. So you've got all of this happening, all of this driven through modern technology and information availability to consumer, and it does already, if you've been in this space, make clear how much more attention you have to pay to reputational matters, to ensuring that the story is a positive one that consumers can share with their friends and colleagues and Twitter followers and the like. But let's pause for a moment and move away from the consumer as a driver of the need for due diligence, and to modern investors, and talk a little bit about what that looks like with regards to expectations, especially for large publicly traded corporations. Some of the smaller privately held ones might be a little bit more insulated from the effects of investors and what they are focusing their attention on, but obviously all the big players in the branded space and the apparel and retail space, many of the big players are public corporations, and so they have to be attentive to the needs of modern day investors, and that's something that is evolving as well, right? A couple of years ago, The Economist ran this cover, August of 2019, asking the question, what are companies for? Right? Until fairly recently, it was the received wisdom that the business of business was business. Right? If you're a publicly traded corporation, your job was to maximize shareholder value, and that often really meant driving the bottom line, increasing profitability of the corporation. But increasingly now, investors are not being satisfied with just that bottom line analysis. They're asking for more. They're asking for what that company's role is in society at large. In the month following that Economist cover, Fortune ran this cover, asking the question more explicitly. Profits and purpose, can big business have it both ways? And you see on the cover the CEOs of such a range of publicly traded consumer-facing organizations as IBM, JP Morgan Chase, and Johnson & Johnson. So you've got this real sense from the investor community, and folks like Larry Fink over at BlackRock have accentuated it by saying that corporations need to have a social purpose as well. They can't simply be about profit at no other consideration, but you've got to look at how they treat their workers, how they treat their supply chain, and look at things that are now collectively called sort of ESG metrics, environmental, social, and governance metrics. Right? So that's the kind of stuff that's evolving as well. And you've just today, as a matter of fact, if you were listening to the news, ExxonMobil had a shareholders meeting, and a couple of board members were replaced by more environmentally conscious ones by activist investors in that corporation. So that is another big movement, and the need again for enhanced due diligence coming out of the investor community. Finally, then, to complete the picture of folks that you have to deal with and countenance their reaction to when it comes to supply chain management, you have governments. And the modern regulator is also evolving and quite significantly in this regard when it comes to how they are viewing the role of business and what is to be expected of business as part of supply chain due diligence. Governments in all major consumer markets, most of the Western governments, Western markets that we're talking about, are increasing their level of activity in this space when it comes to how much they want to enforce supply chain oversight, how much they want to delineate requirements for businesses when it comes to due diligence in the marketplace. And this is taking various forms. It's not simply laws being passed. You know, you've got regulations that build on existing laws, so give them more teeth, enhance them further, or broad policy decisions, and certainly the sort of larger trade space and the various trade wars, or whatever you want to call them, that are going on are manifestations of government engagement and government policymaking in this regard as well. But sticking for a moment with the purely regulatory sort of legislative landscape, one thing that's clear is that until quite recently, until just this past year or so, most of the laws that spoke to these matters tended to be reporting laws, laws that didn't require specific things to be done or particular actions to be taken under penalty of some sort of punishment if you didn't, but rather simply laws that required you to tell the regulators, tell the SEC, tell whoever what it is that you did. A prime example of this is California's Transparency in Supply Chain Act, SB 657, as it's more popularly known, that dates back to 2012. That's the kind of stuff that says, you got to report on these things to the regulators, to the public. That was the norm most laws took until quite recently. However, increasingly, and particularly in Europe, you're seeing governments consider laws that impose specific requirements, right? Not just reporting, but particular things you have to do, and accompanying those requirements, penalties for failing to do so. So it's not simply a matter of just tell us what it is that you're doing, which in theory you could say I do nothing and be in compliance with the law. Not that that would be a good answer, right? But now these are laws that are saying you must do these things, you must have these things in place, and if you don't, there's a penalty, whether it's civil or in some cases, in fact, even proposed criminal liabilities. So this is a group of sort of laws, some sort of a thought space that's being called mandatory human rights due diligence, and they abbreviated it with MHRDD, and the M is lowercase for some reason, I've never figured out. You're seeing a lot of these laws already appearing, as I already mentioned, particularly in Europe. Germany, as a great example, has one on the books. and other jurisdictions in Europe are looking at it. And an EU-wide one is also expected fairly soon, something that the sort of EU Commission is looking at, imposing on all businesses that operate within the EU bloc. So this is sort of the trend that you're seeing, it's seeing some resonance on this side of the pond as well as various U.S. regulatory bodies and laws are being looked at as well. But the U.S. is not the only government focusing on this. I should be clear about that, right? You've already have in place laws in other jurisdictions like the UK Modern Slavery Act. Australia has a similar Modern Slavery Act. Other jurisdictions have tackled this in other ways. Canada has created this role for an ombudsperson for responsible enterprises, or CORE, that's meant to focus on extractive industries and also the apparel and textile space. So there are other ways, legislative and regulatory ways at which this is being looked at, but the message is more and more governments are doing more and more. And enforcement activity using other tools is also increasing. As I said, it's not simply new laws being passed or new regulations being mooted. There is definitely, especially in the US, a focus on international trade and customs enforcement as a mechanism through which, to direct the attention of supply chain actors and require enhanced due diligence. And you see this with, as I said, in the US, with the Customs and Border Protection, CBP, doing things like issuing withhold release orders, not letting shipments come into commerce in the US based on allegations and suspicions of forced labor. And they're doing so under the authority of an old law from 1930, Section 307 of the 1930 Tariff Act. That's been given a lot of teeth and a lot of enforcement happening, especially in the apparel and textile space in this regard recently. It's codified in US law as 19 USC Section 1307, and it is primarily focused on ensuring that no goods made in any way with convict or forced or indentured labor are brought in to the US. And the definition of forced labor is clearly outlined in 19 USC 1307. And basically it's anything for which the worker does not offer himself voluntarily or is extracted from any person under menace of any penalty for its non-performance. So this is a big issue right now, one that is getting a lot of attention, and certainly a path for the need for more enhanced due diligence in supply chain management these days. So what are some consequences to be wary of and resulting from all this? As I said, you're seeing increased legislative, regulatory, and policy activities on the government side. You're seeing increased awareness and in some sense even activism on the consumer side. And you're definitely seeing activists and NGOs picking up on that and trying to make the most of it and really push for those kinds of changes and campaigning hard in favor of such moves, focusing their attention on industry, with the result that brands and organizations like trade associations that lobby for the industry are being forced to react. This is not something that is simply happening in a vacuum. There's a lot of push back and forth and a lot of activism engaged, and you see that across the board in Western economies around the world. What is increasingly clear is that effective supply chain social compliance due diligence and being able to prove that you're doing it right is crucial, absolutely necessary as a part of doing business. There is no way to avoid it and no way to go about it in an inefficient manner. You have to take it seriously and you have to bring to bear resources and attention to this matter because it is critical for your ongoing ability to continue to stay in business. So really, not simply for practical reasons, just ensuring that your goods are not blocked by customs. You want to make sure that no WROs come against you, but also for reputational reasons, making sure that those modern consumers and modern investors that we talked about a second ago do not shun your brand, are able to support you because you do display the kind of attention to ESG metrics, to social responsibility that they are so wedded to. The need, as I said, for that enhanced due diligence and proper social responsibility is clear. And in many ways, has been clear for a while. Folks who have heard me speak at ATS before know I quite often quote this man, and some of you may recognize this picture, because I believe he really summed up the why it matters of it all quite well in a letter he wrote to his investors a while ago now. And he said quite simply, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, you'll do things differently. Those of you who recognize the picture know that I'm talking about Warren Buffett, the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, the sage of Omaha, as he's known, and somebody who I wager knows a thing or two about making money. And so when he speaks about how to go about doing things the right way, I tend to listen, and I tend not to disagree, although I do believe he got something a little bit wrong here, right? Yes, it takes 20 years to build a reputation, but with modern social media, you can ruin it in a lot faster than 5 minutes. It will take less than 20 tweets to tear apart something that you spent 20 years or more to build. So it really is that much more important, that much more critical, that in this modern day and age, you do your due diligence in this brave new world the right way. So really, it comes down to this, right? Responsible brands, responsible players, responsible supply chain actors must conduct effective due diligence, right? And do so in a way that can be shown to be effective, right? To be independent. Because modern day supply chains really are operating under enhanced scrutiny, and that demands enhanced due diligence. The focus is on a wide range of safety and labor issues. Broadly speaking, you will look at any program and see that the core ILO conventions, the core International Labor Organization conventions, are used as a base for this. And so when you have a protocol in place that calls for certain standards to be met, you should be doing good verification done through labor audits, through social compliance audits at workplaces, to check on those core issues, to check on, obviously, no forced labor. We talked about that. That's such a key, big issue these days. No child labor, obviously, of course, and other core rights at the workplace, such as freedom of association, overall acceptable working conditions with regards to health and safety, with regards to wages, with regards to hours, things like no discrimination. All of this is going to be core to ensuring that you have a proper and effective supply chain due diligence mechanism in place. Increasingly, you're seeing some of these approaches also take into account the environment. As I mentioned already, ESG metrics are high on investors' radar screen, and are being part of the broader conversation about sustainability, which is really what it comes down to, right? You want to be able to sustain your business in this era of enhanced scrutiny, and so the need for that enhanced due diligence that comes into place. And then that's one of those things that RAP does. And as I said, I'll take a minute here to talk to you just a bit about my organization, to put some of these remarks into context, and give you sort of that background. Always happy to share more for those of you who wish to learn in even more detail later. RAP, as Jason alluded to earlier, is the world's largest independent factory-based social compliance certification program for this industry, for apparel, footwear, some products. That's the space that we operate in. We made a conscious choice ever since our founding 21 years ago that we will keep our focus on this space. We're not going to try to be all things to all people. We don't certify food or pharmaceuticals. We focus our expertise on this space because we believe we're a better resource with that deeper knowledge that comes with that focus. Our industry scope may be limited, but our geographic scope is not. The W stands for worldwide. RAP, in fact, stands for Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production, for those of you who don't know, and we inspect and certify factories all over the world. We are truly worldwide. We describe ourselves as an objective, nonprofit team of global social compliance experts. That's who we are. What we do is we promote safe, lawful, humane, and ethical manufacturing all over the world. That's our mission. That's what we do. And how we do it is through certification. That's our prime sort of deliverable, our main service. We inspect factories to make sure that they're meeting our standards, and through education. We believe in spreading the gospel of compliance, such as it is, and so are very appreciative of events like this one, and organizations like ATS that from the very beginning have understood the importance of education as a service for those participating in their shows. As an organization, we very much believe in working with industry, as you can see, taking part in a show like this. We are a nonprofit, we're an NGO in that sense, but we don't hold with the theory that, you know, your job is only to criticize, or your job is to be sort of an activist organization to drive change. We think that you can be more effective driving change by talking to folks who have the leverage, who have the power to make that change. And we believe that power is in the supply chain with industry. And so we position ourselves as the program of choice for industry. We actively engage and participate, as I said, with ATS from the beginning, and other trade bodies and trade platforms, including trade associations. And here in the US, the apex body for the branded apparel space is the AAFA, the American Apparel and Footwear Association. And RAP is very proud to be AAFA's official corporate social responsibility partner. We are their official CSR partner. So that's sort of our philosophy. And I won't go into much detail on sort of the RAP code itself. You can see the 12 principles that our program is based on the screen here, and you'll recognize the core ILO conventions on there. We do go a little bit above and beyond most other programs because we have that element on the environment that covers some basics for sort of on-site emissions and the like. And also we recognize that the space that we occupy, these sort of audits are done at factories that are exporting units. And there is the additional value we bring to the table by having a couple of principles that deal with customs and security to make sure that these facilities then become that much better as vendor choices for importers of record here in the US, especially those that are taking part in the CBP's sort of trusted partner programs, such as CTPAT, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. You're supposed to do audits on your supply chain there, and a RAP audit will cover that as part of a single audit, both social and security, to the extent that recently Walmart, for example, announced that RAP audits will be accepted to meet both those criteria, the only social program that can lay claim to that. So very excited to be able to provide that additional service to our stakeholders. I mentioned we're worldwide, just to give you a quick sense of our footprint. We're headquartered in the DC area in Arlington, Virginia, but we have offices also in Hong Kong as well as in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And in addition to these locations, we don't have brick and mortar, but we have full-time personnel for Latin America, in Europe, in India, as well as in key sourcing destinations in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia. I began this little section by saying we're the largest independent program in this space, and I wanted to back it up with some numbers. 2020, as you all know, was a challenging year for everyone, but even so, we received almost 3,000 applications last year. And you can see the top 10 countries that they came from, and no surprises there. They are the top 10 apparel exporting countries when you look at sort of the globe as a whole. Right now, second quarter of 2021, there are just under 2,800 factories employing about 2.8 million workers in about 40 countries that currently hold a RAP certificate. So you can see it's a pretty large footprint, and we're proud to be able to make a difference in the lives of those 2.8 million workers. All right, let me start winding down here so we can have time for Q&A and talk a little bit about what all of this means in terms of best practices for enhanced supply chain due diligence. A key sort of central element here is that you must integrate supply chain social compliance objectives with overall general management, general due diligence systems. Don't have a protocol you have in place to vet your partners for financial and sort of product desirability, and then as an afterthought or as a separate exercise, engage them on whether or not they are socially responsible. That is not effective, and it's not going to work well for you either, because however good they might be from a product quality, delivery, price point of view, it's not going to matter if they don't get to meet a certain social standard, because you don't want them as a vendor, you don't want them as a partner, because they bring such heavy reputational risk with them in today's climate. So you want to make sure that that social compliance due diligence, that enhanced exercise that you're doing now, is integrated into your general systems, your general due diligence approach, because that's going to be the right mechanism and the efficient mechanism by which to do so. And you have to recognize that it involves engaging with all stakeholders to build relationships. It's no longer simply, supply chains are no longer vacuum sealed transactions where it's just a buyer on one end and manufacturer on the other. You're doing this in a larger modern space that has no room to hide in, right? You're going to have to include your consumers, your customers, your investors if you're publicly traded, and certainly regulators and broad civil society in your calculus, because there's no room for you to, as I said, hide if there is information about your supply chain that's going to raise questions about responsible sourcing and ethical manufacturing from some of these investors and consumers and government regulators. So account for that, put that in your hopper as you make the plans, and understand how you're going to be engaging with them. How are you going to tell your story to these stakeholders as part of your overall business practices and supply chain management? It's going to be, if it's going to be successful, it's going to have to be ultimately about credibility and transparency. Whatever you are saying, you got to be able to back up, right? Which is why it's going to be very important for any claims you make to be independently validated, right? You can't simply go out there and say, oh, no, I've checked my factories and they're good. That's not going to fly. You're going to have to go out and say, I've had all my factories get a RAP certificate, and that proves that they're good, right? Because that's an independent player with no dog in the fight. So that sort of credibility, transparency, it's going to be central for whether or not these stakeholders that you have to deal with are going to be able to trust you and are going to be able to support you in your business going forward. To do that, as I mentioned, a good social compliance program is going to be critical as you review your supply chain vendors. And in doing so, however, I caution you that auditing, checking these factories for what their working conditions are, is just the base of the process, right? It's not an end in and of itself. You're never going to simply be able to audit a supply chain into full compliance. Audits will only tell you what's happening in the supply chain. You're going to have to make sure that these conditions are remediated where they need to be, and otherwise kept up if they are indeed up to par. It's ultimately about making sure that you have continuous improvement in your own processes as well as in the processes of your supply chain vendors and partners. So that's going to be an important thing, and goes back again to that 24/7 constant proactive management that we already talked about. And bottom line is education is essential. So much is evolving, so much is changing, and doing so quickly. So I congratulate those of you who are attending this program. And as I said before, I've always been a fan of the ATS's approach in recognizing the importance of education as part of the trade space. And they've done this from the beginning. It's always been very strongly and well put together, these panels and seminars that they organize. So education is going to be essential to making sure you stay competitive and stay effective in this space. Right then, to conclude, we talked about the modern consumer, and we talked about the modern investor and how their mentality has evolved and how they are demanding now transparency and demanding responsible sourcing as a condition for engaging with you. And they now have the tools through that ubiquity of social media and smartphones and information access that enable them to educate themselves about players who might not be meeting the standards that they are demanding of those brands and retailers that they wish to engage with. We talked about modern regulators, particularly Western governments, and how they are increasing their activity and their oversight when it comes to supply chain due diligence and what they're asking for and how they are making modern laws that actually bring with it penalties as opposed to sort of the model they've been coalescing around until recently, which was simply reporting laws. And by the way, these expectations, we haven't really gone into this side of the issue, but these expectations are increasingly focusing not just on tier one, but further upstream in your supply chain. It's not simply that you're going to be exercising good oversight on that final assembly cut and sew, but also on the mill, also further upstream. So you want to make sure as you build programs that you are asking yourself the question, what audits are you doing and how are you going deeper in your supply chain and your understanding and your visibility thereof. So as such, an effective, enhanced because of these requirements, supply chain social compliance due diligence approach is absolutely crucial, absolutely necessary as a part of doing business these days. And you want to make sure that the foundation for this remains a properly implemented and credibly certified social compliance system. And of course, RAP would be one of the best choices you could make in that regard. But the main message to you is to have that enhanced due diligence and to make sure that you are indeed giving this the attention and the overall management oversight that it needs and deserves. So with that, let me thank you for your attention. I appreciate it. I promised it'll be only about 40 minutes of presentation, and I think I've kept that. Gives us plenty of time for Q&A, and I will hand the mic back over to Jason so we can get to those. Thank you again.
Mike is mine. Thank you, Avedis. You know, it always impresses me. I think you, by far as like timing goes and just everything about your presentation, it's like you are like you were a Toastmaster, weren't you, at some point?
Well,
Definitely.
I certainly enjoy the opportunity to share these thoughts, and I've always enjoyed these conversations. So never
Yeah.
been a Toastmaster officially, but I think I might have been okay in that role.
You're very good at your presenting skills and keeping on time. So thank you very much. We do have a question here, a couple of really good questions actually.
Let's hear
Okay, so as a small business, how do very small businesses confirm how their products were made? They don't have the money to see their manufacturer, to fly over to the factories themselves. Is there a closed policy check, I think is what she's saying, or something, someone checking the manufacturers, brands, small businesses can produce safe products that are safe in every category. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does. That's actually an excellent question. And obviously, the larger players in this space are better resourced and better able to do some of this enhanced due diligence. And in all fairness to the small players, I would say that investors and regulators and customs, they understand this too. They take into account sort of the expectation for what constitutes effective due diligence is, to some extent, allowing for differences in resources. What you cannot do is hide behind the small producer, small brand, small player umbrella and say, I do nothing. Right? That's no longer an option. You yourself don't have the money or the resource to visit these factories, but you can make arrangements for some independent pair of eyes to go in. Right? You can't go in, but RAP can. You can make the factory get a RAP certificate, and you will have an independent pair of eyes on site to be able to say with credibility then to whoever you're talking to that I wasn't there, but they are certified, and so I'm confident that the working conditions of that factory are fine. Now, it does get harder for small players to then trace back. All right, so that factory that made the product, the final assembly point was kosher, but what about where they got their resources from, right? So the ability of a small player to lean on the factory and say, tell me where you got your product, your raw materials, is going to be difficult. So you might want to be sort of cognizant of that. But as I said, insisting on them then showing you some sort of validation of their suppliers. They might show you a RAP certificate for their mill, right? As an example. So there are things small players can do that are not going to be resource heavy. Social compliance programs in general, and RAP as an example, will not require the buyer or the brand to make the payment. The factory typically is the one that does, because they are getting the certificate, which they can show to multiple buyers, not just a small buyer in question. So there is that ability to engage some sort of effective checking mechanism. Likewise for other elements. I think the question asked about product safety and other things as well. Again, you might not be able to go and get your own eyes onto the product, but you can have the product sent to you and have it tested in a lab, again, a credible independent one, to give you that comfort that the product quality aspects are being addressed as well. So in short, it's a great question. It's much harder for a small player to do it all him or herself, but they don't have to. And in fact, this is a point I'll make more generally. Even the big guys, even the ones that can do it themselves, ought not to, because it is much more credible to have an independent validation of the claim that's being made than it is to say I did it myself and I'm saying it's good. So great question, and I hope that was a helpful answer.
No, that was. And a follow-up to that, same Jamala asking another follow-up question. So she's got a couple factories that she might use. She's confirmed they do great work. So from a quality, it sounds like from a quality perspective, they're at her expectations. Her question is, how does she know if they want RAP to go in? I guess it's, what's the process of asking them, I suppose, is her question. And what are the costs for them if they are not RAP certified for them and or us as the.
Well, I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit more about that. So first of all, if she hasn't already, she should ask if they are. I mean, there are almost 3,000 factories out there, so maybe they already have a RAP certificate. But if not, then it really is a fairly straightforward process. The factory is the one that has to initiate it. They come to our website and they register. And it's a flat fee. It's $1,195 US for the factory to register with RAP. And that gives them a 6-month period in which to go through the process, have the audit. They'll have to pay a separate fee for the audit to the audit firm. And that will depend on how long the audit is. We have a sort of a categories by how big factories are that determine how many mandates, how many auditors have to be in the factory for how long. So it's not a very expensive proposition for a factory to go through the audit. The real point is if the factory has good systems, has good procedures in place, and is able to meet the standards, then that's really all that the spend will be. 1,195 for US and for RAP, and maybe about that for the audit. If they are found lacking in certain things, however, then the remediation process and what exactly is required to be done will determine how long and how costly it might be. It really is better to think about these things more as investments, however, not so much the cost, right? But what you're getting in return for that amount of money you're putting in is this independent validation that's going to give the buyer peace of mind and you, the factory, a weapon in your arsenal to market yourself as a desirable partner for other buyers as well. So it's fairly straightforward, as I said. And if Jamila wants additional details, happy to share them. We have, as I mentioned, on the ground personnel in all of the major sourcing destinations. So the factories, if they have questions, can actually pick up the phone in their own working hours and dial a local number and talk to somebody who speaks their own language and get the answers they need in order to proceed with the process.
Well said. And you got to remember, these guys want your business. If just because you're asking them questions like this, some people can be a little bashful about like, oh, I don't want to rub them the wrong way, but it's entirely within your right to ask these questions. And $1,000 really in the grand scheme of things isn't a big cost for them. And if it means the difference between them getting a purchase order from you and I don't know how big the purchase order is, but most are going to be above $1,000. They're going to make it back right away. And they may just agree to it because they want your business. Just that one order alone may justify the cost, and it's going to benefit them. That's something you can explain to them, or you can put them in touch with RAP, and RAP can explain to them is that this is in their best interest to gain more business in the future for a nominal fee. So it's definitely something. And you think you flip that on its head, if you are looking for investors in the long run, who isn't looking to infuse more capital into their operation? You got to think about how attractive that's going to be to them and your consumer base. So there's really a win-win for everybody in this regard.
That's great advice, Jason. I don't doubt, and it sounds like Jamila is working with small factories. I don't doubt that for them, it is a challenge in terms of, every dollar is something that they hold precious. I absolutely don't doubt that. But all the advice you gave is spot on, and the importance of thinking it as an investment and thinking long-term matters. But I would also finally say this to Jamila. If the factory is unwilling to invest just a couple of $1,000s for an order that you want to give, that I'm guessing is worth more than that, then that itself raises a question mark in my mind. Why are they not willing to make that investment? What is it that they're afraid of, so to speak? So I would definitely encourage open and frank discussions, and as I said, happy to have detailed conversations with the factory directly if it'll help them understand the process better.
Yeah, and that's a great point about why aren't they willing to do a certification for such a nominal fee? And it's not just the bad press and PR that could come from something happening, but imagine you have your entire purchase order tied up in that factory and there's a fire, and then there goes your entire, so there's a bottom line aspect to be considered here as well. So you want to know that not only are you doing ethical business, but that your products and your investors and whoever, your stakeholders are also, it's a risk factor mitigation process. We have another question here from Sarah Marie. Are there any other ethically minded certifications that you view as relevant best practice compliance programs that you would like buyers to be aware of?
Well, it's a good question. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of our peers. We don't think of ourselves as competitors in the sort of sense of the word that you would think of as Coke and Pepsi. We're all mission-oriented organizations. It goes without saying, and I'm naturally biased, that I think RAP is the best certification program out there, right? But even as a biased person, I would submit that I'm backing that up with purely objective numbers. We are the largest. I'm guessing that suggests that we're good at what we do. But we're not the only ones, right? There are other programs out there. Not all of them are certification programs. I think one of the reasons why I believe RAP is so successful is that of some of the other players out there, there are models that have varying degrees of rigor, for want of a better way of putting it. And they're not, I mean, they're all aiming to achieve different things. There are programs like in Europe, one called BSCI, that's housed in Amfori, the trade association there, or SMETA, which is part of SEDEX in the UK, that have good protocols, very similar to RAP and other good programs out there. But they are audit programs. They go in and have a factory go through an audit, and they would generate a report. And there is a standard against which they're being measured, but there is no necessity to pass the audit. All you get is, here's what the audit found, and that report is then passed on to the buyer, the brand, for them to determine whether or not the findings give them a sense of comfort in working with that factory, right? We believe that the better approach is a certification program like RAP that not only has the standard and the audit, but requires the factory to meet the standard before it will issue a certificate, right? So for those other kind of programs, you have a single audit, and then you get the report. For RAP, you might need more than one audit because that first audit reveals that you're okay here and here and here, but these two things, you're not meeting the standard. So you got to fix those things, be checked again before you can get certified. So that is how RAP operates. There are other certification programs out there as well. There's one called Social Accountability International that operates a certification standard called SA 8000. It's another peer organization. One big difference between us and them is that, as I said, we focus on this space. This is apparel, sewn products, and the sort of immediately ancillary space is all we do. SA 8000 will certify other kinds of activities as well. So, so there are players out there, Sarah Marie, and there are good variety to look at. I would suggest that you ask these questions. Who is doing the checking? What is sort of the credibility and the credentials, so to speak, of the organization? I would definitely repeat my point from earlier. You could get a audit report that's done by a brand on their own supply chain. Those programs exist out there too. In fact, overall, there's probably more of those kinds of audits than any other. But I would wager that there is a credibility gap there. I'm not saying that these guys go out there and actively seek to subvert information, but they are vested in that facility. They want that factory to pass. So I'd question those. Then there is that second layer, as I said, of audits that are just audit programs. They're not actually a standard that you have to certify against. They have a standard, but they're just auditing you against that. So that's like going to the doctor and the doctor saying, here's your blood work. You figure out whether that's good or bad, right? And then you have at the highest level certification programs like RAP that will tell you when you look at that blood work, the cholesterol is high, or that's my doctor always tells me that, or whatever. So you're going to actually have to meet a standard before you are certified. So hopefully that helps answer that.
Well said. Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There's something very extremely powerful about using a name like RAP, who is the authority. And because, like you said, you guys only focus on the apparel soft goods space. And, back to your point earlier about social media and how the landscape of how your brand direction is not only delegated by you, the owners and the brand itself, but by the external influences. And what a powerful tool to use as a marketing piece that you can use to educate your consumer base and your potential investors. Like, hey, look, we have a RAP certification with all the factories that we use. That is something you can plaster all over your social media, your website, sharing links, cross promotion. The possibilities are endless. If you think about, I love what you said, Avedis, about the investor bid. That's something a lot of people don't consider. One of the biggest things that brands seek out is more capital, because they can do more, they can grow, they can hire more employees, produce a better product. And, an investor is going to come in and they're going to say, what's my risk in investing in your company? If you have a RAP certification, my risk has gone down substantially. I might consider throwing money your way a little bit more. There's all these other factors that come into play about, and actually we had a question just came in. What is the cost for us? I think that's probably a good thing to tie off everything. I think that might be a misconception about, as the brand, is there a cost for using Wrap?
Right. So the way Wrap is set up, actually, we don't want the brand to be in any way giving us money. We don't want to be beholden to the brand. We want to be independent of that important stakeholder in there. So for a brand, all we're saying is, tell your factories to get Wrap certified. Tell them that it's part of your due diligence. It's something you're required to do business with you, but there's no actual cost. In fact, Wrap, one of the big differences between Wrap and some of the other programs that I mentioned in answer to the previous question is that we are not a membership program. You cannot join Wrap. We don't want to be in that position where we have to make a decision about a factory that may be a major supplier to a key brand and worry whether or not that will determine whether they will sign that membership check for us next year. We don't do that. So there is no cost to the buyer, to the brand, but we would definitely hope that they would encourage their factories, would work with them, and let them know how important it is that they get Wrap certified. So easy answer, cost is zero to the brand.
And reach out to these guys. I'm telling you, like one of the biggest disconnects in any industry really, but we see it quite frequently in apparel, is it can be overwhelming and intimidating to see these big players, because Wrap is an international big company, nonprofit. However, that's what they're there for. They're there to help you guys. And if you have any questions, if you're trying to figure out how do I best approach these factories or anything else under the sun, give them a call. They're there for you, as are we at ATS. If you want to go through us as well, we can point you in the right direction, connect you with the right people. And which is a great segue into mentioning that's what our show office is for on the main dashboard of the virtual trade show we have going on. If you want to go down about halfway, scroll down the page, you'll see a pulsating purple button that says enter, and that's the show office that doubles as our show floor. So speakers like Avedis and a lot of other speakers and partners will be in and out of there, but also our show staff and matchmaking. So if you have any questions, you need to be pointing in the right direction, that's the place you'll do that. Also, be sure to check out our pavilions. There's 2 of them for this show. That's where all of our suppliers are. You can also ask them questions, ask them if they're Wrap certified. Yeah, so we're here for you. There's a lot of complexity in this industry, but there's people out there that can help you with little to no cost in this case. So again, it's good to see you. Thanks again for a very, very, very detailed presentation. Hopefully I get to see you in person next year.
I'm looking forward to it, Jason. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work, and thank you again for the opportunity. Take care.
Take care.